We welcome Professor Sue Richards, who is chair of St. Peter's Activity Group, known as SPAG, which sounds a bit jokey.
Think of it as spelling and grammar.
She and her team, including James Burberry, will talk about the extra tutoring available for poorer children in Islington since 2019. She also does a 3-week-long summer school SPAG, bringing in children from 6 different partner schools. She has been an inhabitant of Islington since 1980 and a really worthy citizen of this borough. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, James.
Thank you very much. That's great. And thank you so much for coming. You didn't, we had to. You didn't. And so everyone who's made it through this heat, we are really grateful to, and look forward to having a nice hour with you. We thought we'd introduce ourselves a bit further before getting on with the presentation. So I'm Professor Sue Richards. And I'm the chair of, I'll give you the full name of the charity, St. Peter's Children's and Young People's Activities Group. How about that for a mouthful? If you're ever thinking of starting a charity, think of, you know, how many times you're going to have to say its name, and don't choose one that's long. My background is that I'm a sort of mixture really of a public servant, an academic, a practice-orientated academic. I was a professor at the University of Birmingham in the School of Public Policy for about 15 years. And I've also set up as a founding partner in a consultancy business, which is probably how I can afford to live in Islington. My academic background, the thing I'll tell you about what I did, because it's relevant to our subject today, is that I got very interested in the whole issue of wicked problems and silo-based public services and the need to have joined-up government. I didn't invent the term wicked problems, but I did export it from the rather obscure journals of decision science into the world of public policy. And just before the 97 Labour government started, a potential minister got to know about her, I got to talk to her, and before long I had a phone call from one Peter Mandelson to come in and talk. So I did. Anyway, that was the kind of main academic contribution at the time. What I then did was rejoin. I had been a civil servant right at the beginning of my career, but I joined again in 2005 as Director of Strategic Leadership in the Cabinet Office, the National School of Government, the Cabinet Office, and worked on a whole series of leadership programmes that were for the whole system, bringing together civil servants, local government, police, health, probation, lots of people like that, to try and learn how to work together to make the whole system work. We also did other things. I briefly ran a leadership programme for ministers of state, and nothing you could do to me would drag out the details of how the people who were still ministers actually performed on that programme. So anyway, let that pass. So all the joined-up government stuff seemed to get swept away by the election in 2010. But my hope is that it will be coming back shortly because Greater Manchester is a really good example of a devolved and more joined up government. So that's all I wanted to say about me. Let me hand over to James to talk about him.
Thank you, Sue, and yes, thank you to all of you for having us here today and for joining us in this heat. Briefly about myself, so I'm a trustee of the charity that Sue chairs. I've been with the charity for about a year. I have a business life where I'm not being a trustee. I work as a software engineer. I've been doing that for 20 years or so around finance, utilities, various industries. But in the last 3 years, I've been doing that on a freelance basis rather than on an employed basis, mainly because of my young son, William. He's 7-year-old at a state primary here in Islington. I've been wanting to spend more time with him and less time making money for other people, but it also gives me some time to do things like this and be part of great charities like the one we're talking to you about today. So that's me, and I'll let Sue tell you a bit about our origin story.
And you understand how grateful I am that James came our way. We had virtually no IT before he arrived, and now, are we good? So there we are, amongst all the many other advantages he brings. So I'm going to try and take you through our story. We've been in existence now, this is our 8th year. It'll be the 8th summer project that we start in about a month's time. So just to give you, a sense of how it's all gone briefly before we can dive into some of the more detailed aspects of it. And we've got, through James, some interesting pieces of evidence to give to you about various aspects of this. So if you're ever asked to give a talk, and you think, oh God, can I bear to do this? Oh, I'm busy. Remember the story that started us, because I have to say we were members of St Peter's Ward Labour Party, although we dislodged our party political label early on in order to become a charity and so on. But we were having a talk at our ward meeting from somebody from the Child Poverty Action Group, and even though we're mostly old and grizzled and been around a long time, we were shocked by what we learned about poverty of the children living around us in Islington. We'll have more of that in a minute. So afterwards, a few of us got together and decided we'd try and do something practical about this. It's okay being interested in policies. What about what's happening on the ground? And at that time, there weren't summer programs. And so we decided we'd try and run a summer program that was lots of fun, but to use the strapline that we've developed, where the children were having so much fun they didn't realise how much they were learning, and that this would be a free service and it would be for educationally disadvantaged children. So we got ourselves registered with the Charity Commission, got a bank account, did all those things, and ran our first programme in the summer of 2019, learning a lot on the way. We always, from the beginning, have employed teachers to interact with the children. And we, the trustees and others around us, work as volunteers to do the additional stuff. You're talking to a volunteer dinner lady here, or I'm talking to you. That's the role I tend to pick up when we run our summer programme. So, a learning experience, and then the next 2 years were an incredible learning experience, because then we got into the first and second COVID years. And if you remember, children were not at school. They were, often in our area in small flats, cooped up, not seeing other children of the same age. And so we decided we'd run, and we made all the arrangements to do that. Actually, looking back, because of the lockdown, there was an abeyance of the virus over the summer months. And anyway, it doesn't spread quite as much in hot weather, it seems, although I don't think we knew that then. So we did, during, obviously 2020 was pre-vaccine, but in both years we did a lot of wiping clean, lots of stories, that the virus is spread through droplets. Those children have never been as clean, their books have never been as clean, the toilets have never been as clean as they were that year. And it was, our work was hugely valued by those kids, so they so needed to be with their peer groups and doing lively things sometimes, gentle things at other times. And that's, we felt that was really good. And we managed to get through 2 COVID summers with no COVID infections through all the usual safeguards. So that's Gunnings, and then we then did another year, and at that point lost some of our original supporters who thought, having done 3 years, 4 years, that was probably enough. and we started to reflect on what we were achieving. What we were really trying to do was to give the children who we took, who were in years 5 and 6, the last 2 years of primary, a flying start into secondary, so that they stood a chance of fulfilling their talents and reaching the level that they should reach. And with luck, getting through secondary and qualifying at the end in a way that would allow them to have a job that didn't pay a poverty wage. So with that in mind, we got the help of a just retiring brilliant primary school head teacher who persuaded us that we should develop and evolve our model. And she said, this is what we did, actually, for reading, writing and arithmetic, which they really need small group work on, the schools are better at doing that. They just don't have the resources to do it for the number of children who need it, either individually or in small groups. So you should spend some of your money on partnership with the schools, allow the schools to do that, grant the schools some money to pay for extra tutoring. And the other part of your money you should spend on giving them an enriching experience, because what the evidence seems to be that children from better off families have much more interesting summers, and that helps them to continue to develop, and their educational attainment continues to grow, their measured attainment. But that doesn't happen with children whose families don't have those resources. So continue to do a summer programme. And anyway, so there we are, that's our origin story. We had, at the point that the model shifted, we had an influx of fantastic new trustees. There are two of us who are still around from the early days, myself as chair, and Helen over there, Helen Schofield, who was a former children's centre manager at Coram Fields. I knew Helen kind of before I ever met her, because I used to work near there, and there's a notice on the playground at Coram Fields, which I now know Helen put up there, which says, adults not admitted unless accompanied by a child. And that inversion, seeing the world differently, is what Helen gives us. Really glad to have a presence, but we've also got, as of around that time, the shift of the model, a retired GP, a food bank organiser, an absolutely fantastic special needs teacher who's taught on the summer programme from the beginning, is now the head of the primary section of Islington's pupil referral unit, part-time in that role, and works part-time for us as our project manager. Of course, our two latest recruits, James, you've heard about, and Annie, who many of you will know, who also helps with iu3a, who is such a boon to us. She moved to London in the winter and had a long record of voluntary sector leadership in Leeds, and we're just getting a huge benefit from her strategic vision, so that's great for us. So that's the outline of our story, and I'm going to hand over to James to say more about some of the evidence that surrounds it.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, so as Sue said, what I'm going to do with the things that I say today is try to provide a little bit of evidence and rigour behind what we do and why we do it. And I'm going to start by talking to you about poverty in Islington, which many of you, if we live in Islington, we probably know a fair bit about poverty in Islington. We're aware of the fact that Islington is in some ways a deprived part of the country. The data I'm showing here is English Indices of Deprivation from 2025. So we're looking here at areas in Islington. We've highlighted those where our partner schools are based, and we're talking about where they sit in terms of deprivation, overall deprivation. And they sit towards the bottom end. On this slide, I've got my little dots on the bottom here which show me whereabouts they are, with more deprived over here, less deprived this end. And we sit towards the more deprived end, the areas which we're in. And that probably doesn't surprise any of us who live here. But actually, these numbers show that the most deprived of our little areas where our schools are is more deprived than 82%. So it's not in the bottom 15%. And that's a very important metric for some of our funders because they look at the worst 15%, the most deprived 15%, as one where they really want to focus their efforts. But what's really interesting about these numbers is that this is an overall deprivation view, and if we take a view of income deprivation affecting children, then these areas get a lot worse, a lot worse. These are the same 5 areas, and now this one here, 2 of our schools in that area, which is noted in brown, is more deprived than 98% of neighbourhoods in England when it comes to child deprivation, income deprivation affecting children. So although Islington as a whole has problems with deprivation, children are disproportionately affected even by those standards. Another way of looking at that is to look at deprivation pupil premium. So this is extra funding that the government gives to schools, and it's based on children who grow up in income-deprived backgrounds. Now, the average across England is that 25% or so of children qualify for DPP. If we look by local authority, there's Islington, joint bottom, out of 153, joint bottom, with 48.5% of children eligible for DPP, so twice the English average. If we look by parliamentary constituency, we break down to 543 parliamentary constituencies in England, and Islington, South and Finsbury, which is where all our partner schools are based, is 9th from bottom out of those 543. It comes in the same breath as places like Birmingham and Ladywood, it comes in the same breath as places like Horton and Denton. We are right down towards the bottom end, with 50% of our children in those areas eligible for DPP. And in fact, the most surprising statistic maybe for you today is that in one of our 6 partner schools, that number is 74.7%. 3/4 of the children in one of the schools that we work with are eligible for DPP because of the income deprivation with which they live. That's my first piece of evidence for you to talk about the fact that we have children who are growing up in severe poverty, and we have lots of them. And that's what started to drive us to help those children. Susie.
Your map is really, really hard to read from here. Can you sort of describe the area we're talking about?
Certainly. Yes. So this map here, this is Islington as a whole. I've got the A501 running from King's Cross here down to Moorfields here. And then in this area here, so we are currently sitting here at St Mary's, and I have my schools, the Essex Road up here, and I've got my schools St John Evangelist, I've got Rotherfield, I've got New North Academy, I've got St Mary's, all in this block, in and around the Essex Road north of the Angel. Okay? Super.
So, just reminding you what we're trying to do here, our purpose. That is to work with disadvantaged year 5 and 6 children in our 6 local primary schools, to provide their schools with some resources, to provide them with small group or individual tutoring, and to provide a summer programme for them to try and stop their performance dropping off, and giving them something interesting and worthwhile to do. And the hope that through these 2 years of transition, they will enter secondary school better able to benefit from it, and start to get the positive feedback that comes from meeting their potential and progressing to a good outcome from school, which, you know, whether it's further training or whether it's going into work, is, we hope, going to place them in a position where they're going to be able to realistically aspire to earning a wage in their adult life that will not plunge their own families into poverty. So over to James again.
Thank you. So the second piece I want to tell you about in terms of evidence is linking economic disadvantage to educational disadvantage. We said there are lots of children growing up in economic disadvantage, but what does that mean in terms of their education? Well, what I've got on this first slide here, again, I'll describe this because I appreciate it's small. This is a figure from a Roundtree Foundation study. It comes from 2024, so it's relatively recent. And this is interviewing teachers about the effects of poverty that they see in their children. This is national, this is not related to Islington, this is asking teachers, what do you see as negative effects of poverty that cause it to be difficult for your children to come to school and learn? And we've got things like children coming to school hungry. We've got children not coming to school. We've got children coming to school dirty, with mental health or physical health problems arising that are taking time away from education. We've got children who don't have access to learning resources at home or have nowhere to do homework, no access to internet at home perhaps, those sorts of things. These are the things that the teachers say are linking the economic deprivation of their children to the difficulty those children have to learn. And the numbers here are up again at the 40, 45, 50%. 50% of teachers are seeing these things in the children they're trying to teach. They're seeing the link between economic disadvantage and educational challenge. And alongside that is something that we talk about called the summer dip. Sue mentioned this briefly, and it's something that any teachers that I know recognise to be true from what they feel, what they see in their schools. They see that over the summer, children come back to school having lost ground, that's how they perceive it, and they see that that affects children who are growing up in poverty more than others. Now actually the evidence doesn't quite show that. The research that I found does show a difference, but not quite a dip. This is a study from 2001 in Baltimore primary school children, which is the most rigorous study I could find that tried to verify the existence of the summer dip. And actually what it found was not a dip, but it did find a widening of the gap between richer and poorer children. What it showed was that over the summer, children in upper SES backgrounds, so upper socio-economic status backgrounds, continued to grow and learn in their education through the summer, and their tested results after the summer were better than those before. Conversely, those children in lower SES backgrounds stayed flat through the summer. So we didn't exactly see a dip in that research. What we did see is a widening of the gap between those children who have resources at home to enrich them and help them to grow through the summer and those who don't. And so those 2 points of evidence together make us believe that those children we've talked about who are growing up in poverty suffer economic disadvantage and suffer it particularly over the summer relative to their richer peers. And Sue is going to therefore tell you a bit more about what we do about that.
Okay, right. So we've got as you might have gathered from the earlier thing about the model changing, we've really got a two-phase programme. We spend 60,000 a year, well we raise 60,000 a year and spend it obviously. And about a third of it goes on the grants that we give to our 6 partner schools, who pick out those children who would benefit from extra small group or individual attention and provide tutoring in reading and writing and maths, or whichever combination of those things that is most needed. And they can decide who's eligible for that. They don't have to pass a preschool meals test. And they sometimes run them at Easter, have Easter boosters, during which time we, the helpers, the volunteers, do packed lunches. Or they might find they get better turnout if they do it early, before school or after school. The decisions vary depending on school circumstances and the availability of willingness of their staff to put in extra hours. Sometimes they've got associates who know the children well and can come in and do that work. And that's really the critical thing. They know precisely where the children are on their journey towards meeting their attainment goals. And so that's all brought to bear on the needs of individual children. We've got at the back our annual report for last year, and anyone, since our numbers are below the 50 that we printed, everybody, if they wish, can have a copy, which shows comments of children on the tutoring and of tutors too, about what a difference it makes just to, and I'll be all right now in maths, now I understand that. So there's a real step forward, and James will say in a minute more about what's achieved in that. And then the 2/3 of our 60,000 is spent on running the summer programme, which we do for 60 children, and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. So over to you for tutoring.
Yes, so again, trying to bring some evidence to understand whether or not we're being successful in what we're doing. And this is looking at the tutoring side. This is looking at that 1/3 of our funds that we spend on providing grants to our partner schools for tutoring. What we ask those schools to do is to help us by providing entry and exit data for those pupils to see how they're doing relative to age-related expectations. Are they meeting those expectations? Are they above or below, or very far above or very far below? So we get scores for our children before and after. And what we know from our last year is that we do improve those scores with our tutoring intervention. We had 90 pupils go through this programme last year, and we found a net improvement of 40 to 50, depending on which reading, writing and maths we're talking about. Now what that means is we score +1 if we improve the child by 1 level, we score -1 if they drop by 1 level, we score 0 if they stay where they are, and our net improvement is 41, 41, 46. So we're seeing that we are getting an improvement. What that really means, if you translate it to one of our schools, is that they've got 15 children per school going through, and they can expect the tutoring to improve the rate, to improve the level of half of those children. So we can see an impact of the tutoring that we're doing. We can see that it has an effect. And this, by the way, they're getting a grant of £3,000 each, £3,500 each. So for not very much money, we can build on everything else those schools are doing so well, and we can demonstrate an improvement. One of the things I'm aware of when I'm trying to use this as evidence of what we do is that we have a very small sample size. So I'm also creating in a slightly larger organisation called Action Tutoring. Now that's a charity I also work with, and they do a similar thing on a slightly larger scale. They're a national charity, and they also attempt to offer tutoring to disadvantaged children here in Islington and elsewhere. And they have much larger data sets and more rigorous abilities to test those, and what they find is that they do also improve the outcomes of those children. In Key Stage 2, what their SATS results showed was that before their intervention, disadvantaged children had a 63% chance of hitting the expected level, and non-disadvantaged children had an 81% chance. And after their intervention, that gap had disappeared. They were able to close that gap by providing that tutoring. On the maths side, they didn't quite show the same thing. They didn't quite have so much success, but they still improved the chances of those children meeting the expected level from 61% to 73%. So we know, both from our own small data sets and from larger data sets of people doing similar things, that tutoring interventions work. They're positive, and for us, they're positive at very low cost. Now, Susan will say a bit more about the Sun School itself.
Okay. Thanks, James. We're a bit like Jack in the Box, aren't we? One stands up, the other sits down. It probably won't come as a surprise to many people in this room that tutoring makes a difference to a child's performance, because many of you will be grandparents paying for tutoring for your grandchildren. But it's good to have the numbers to actually demonstrate that. And I wish I could say that we had good evaluated numbers to demonstrate the impact of our summer programme, but I have to be honest, we don't really. A friend who's in the audience came up to me and said, what are the difficult questions I should ask you? That was the one I gave her, so I'll just say it up front. We don't know about the longer term impact. What we do know is that of our 60 children, we get an overall attendance rate over the 3 weeks that we run of 75%, which is not all that much below Islington's compulsory education score. So we think at least we're responding to the children's and parents' felt need. Whether we go further is something we haven't had the resources to do, but we'll hope to do in the future. So what's it like? What do we do? Well, James is going to say more in a bit about the next word I'm going to use, trauma-informed practice. And we've started to understand this term and appreciate it just in the last year or so. But I think we were in practice doing much of this earlier on, because we've always tried to establish a culture which is about kindness, gentleness, building relationships, caring for each other. Everybody has a voice, everybody is listened to. There are, really quite strong values of pedagogy behind that, which I say we'll now call it trauma-informed practice, and there's a good reason for that. But that's our general line. What do? We have all sorts of sessions. We have 3 groups of 20. We have a teacher and a teaching assistant with each group, as well as our overall project manager. We do lots lots and lots of reflective, self-reflective stuff. We do fantastic sports, football, cricket, tennis, and many other things. The thing they love most when we ask them, so obviously we did get them to fill in response sheets. The thing they love most is kayaking. So down they go for a day with Islington Boat Club, where they not only have fun in the water, but they also learn how to navigate a kayak and get that accomplishment behind them. It's a little story I just probably have time to tell. Hurrying along, there's a girl who came a few years ago who was really school phobic. She wouldn't go in at first. She needed a lot of coaxing from first her mum and then teachers, and it was really hard to get her in. She stayed for 3 weeks, gradually unwound, was able to cope with things. And in the kayaking that they did, I think that year in the final week, she was with a group, and a friend fell out of her kayak, which was, it would have panicked the girl I'm talking about right at the beginning. But by that time, she found herself more, and she paddled off and collected up the kayak, which had gone astray, brought it over and helped her friend get back into it. And that just seems to me, it's a small thing, but it just says something about increasing confidence that we hope to get out of this. So lots of sport, widening horizons. We go to the seaside, which just a day out at I can't remember the place beyond Southend. Sorry. Say I don't. Shoebury, yes, got it. Yes, I've been there a number of times. Can't remember its name. It's a lovely place to go. And always on any trip, lots of our children have never been on a proper train before, and certainly never been to the seaside. And if you look at our annual report, you'll see a story about a young boy called J.K., who he was really a very troubled boy, had a very traumatic background from a refugee family, came every day huddled up in big thick joggers and a big hoodie, which he never took off, despite the heat. Wouldn't look at people, had to eat separately, couldn't bear to be with people. We never saw him smile. He opened up during the time we were with him, but for us the great flourish of this was on his trip to the seaside. He saw, it's actually the estuary, but good enough. He saw the sea, he ran all the way down into it, wearing his thick clothes, and just waded around. And then he came out in the heat and lay on the sand, arms and legs wide, looking up at the sky and smiling. And that was just such a lovely story to symbolise what difference we can make in the lives of these children. So, read about him. We hope he'll be back this year. He was a year 5 last year when this happened. Probably the final point is that it's really good food. When we started all this, there weren't funds centrally to provide summer feeding for deprived children, and that's all happened since then because of COVID, and it's still in place. So we actually get a big chunk of our funds from the Holiday Activities and Food Fund, who, particularly for disadvantaged children, can pay us a sizable sum of money per head of child who attends. But it's good food. As a dinner lady, I can tell you I give them the same food as I would give my own grandchildren. And it's a great time of year for food. There's so much beautiful fruit, and it doesn't cost very much. And they learn about food, they cook, they do baking, they do sewing, lots of gardening, lots of domestic things, as well as the lively sports. Over to James to say more about trauma.
Thank you, Sue. I just want to say a little bit about this phrase trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed approach, and try to explain the theory behind that and why we think that's useful. Probably to start with, I need to make the link between poverty and trauma. I've been standing here talking about children growing up in poverty, economic disadvantage, and now we're using the word trauma, and I'd like to explain why we think that's a valid link to make. Some people would argue growing up in poverty is a trauma, but that's not the claim I'm making here. Rather, I'm making the claim that children who are growing up in poverty are very likely to have also experienced trauma. The term adverse childhood experiences is used, and studies show us that children growing up in poverty do have a much higher likelihood of experiencing multiple ACEs. So this study I'm appealing to here is from 2020, and it is Imperial and University of Bristol. And they looked at a number of children growing up in poverty, and they looked at the ACEs that they'd experienced, and they particularly looked at those who'd experienced multiple ACEs. Now, by ACEs, we're thinking about things like parental separation, we're thinking about parents being convicted of crimes, we're thinking about parents with mental health issues, we're thinking about different types of abuse. And what was found by this study, is that children growing up in poverty are much more likely to experience those things than children not. The numbers on this slide are called odds ratios. So this is saying how much more likely is it that a child will experience these things if they're growing up in poverty. And the numbers here are 3.6, 4.5, 2.2, 9.1. 9.1 is this one on the right for polyadversity, which means that these children are experiencing lots of these traumas. Children growing up in poverty are 9 times more likely to experience polyadversity than children not growing up in poverty. So a link between poverty and trauma exists in the research. So if we know that, and we know therefore that some of the children we're working with are likely to have been affected by trauma, what are we going to do about it and why? The theories I'm appealing to here are from an organisation called Beacon House. I work with these people quite a bit in a number of places, partly helping me to look after my own son who has some additional needs and who responds very well to the practices that these theories advise, partly from my current role as a prospective adopter. We talk a lot about these things in adoption training, and so this is something that I'm working with a lot at the moment as I go towards an adoption panel. What's the theory here? Well, what we're saying is we can think about the brain in 3 ways, in 3 levels of development. A primitive brain that develops first, a limbic brain that develops second, and a cortical brain that develops third. And the primitive brain is really about sensory inputs and survival. And the limbic brain is about attachment and emotional development. And the cortical brain is about learning in an educational setting. And the theory here is children who are experiencing trauma are really struggling to work in those bottom 2 areas and are not able to devote brain processing time to the cortical brain. They're still in that position where they're working on sensory inputs, they're working on survival, they're working on attachment, their emotional development is not where it needs to be, and they're not in a place to work in the cortical brain. They're not in a place to learn. What you see on this slide, and I'll share this slide afterwards because again I appreciate it's small, this is thinking about the loop of negative feedback that can happen if you don't have an awareness of that when you're trying to work with these children. So you're seeing, a teacher is seeing, or a parent in my case, is seeing bad behaviour. They're seeing a child that is struggling in these areas of the brain, struggling with sensory inputs, struggling to feel as though they're trying to survive, and is acting out or misbehaving as a response. And a behaviour-led approach to that, a telling off, sanctioning, tends to drive a feedback loop because the child is then understanding that they're not safe, understanding that they're not able to survive, understanding that they're not able to make an attachment with me as a parent or with their teacher. And so that feedback loop continues with the child continuing to be stuck in these areas of the brain. And what we're trying to do with a trauma-informed approach is to break out of that by saying, we're going to recognise that's where the child is, we're going to work really hard on understanding the challenges that they're facing and try to help them to work in this third area rather than trying to sanction them for not doing so. Again, I'm trying to be very rigorous today about evidence, and I want to tell you that there isn't evidence that this works in an educational setting. A number of people have tried to prove that this improves educational outcomes, and they haven't done so. There aren't studies that show that educational outcomes are improved by trauma-informed practice. But anecdotally, we really think that they are. I know this from my own experience as a parent. I get much better results with my son when I think in this way, and when I forget to, when I get frustrated, and when I go back to this kind of behaviour-led approach, I get much worse outcomes for my son. So I know that this works for me. And lots of teachers that I speak to who've tried this know that it works for them, feel that it does. But again, I don't want to mislead. I don't have rigorous evidence that shows that educational attainment is improved. Nevertheless, we believe that it is, and that's why we work in that way. Sue.
Thank you. So that's fantastic psychological insight, child development insight. Our very last substantive point to bring to the room is a sociological one. And we're drawing on the work of Robert Putnam, American sociologist. Depending on what your background is, you might have come across his fantastically well-known work, Bowling Alone, which was published in the year 2000. That's bowling as in, bowling, that kind of bowling. And his book was to really highlight the fact that features of modern life drive us apart and individualise us. And actually we are social animals, and if we do not have contact with others, meaningful contact with others, then the danger is that our mental health will suffer, our general well-being will suffer. And we'll have to go bowling alone rather than have a group of mates we could just link up with and do social activities like that too. And that's bonding social capital is what it's called. So the relationships, the set of networks are social capital. And it's bonding because it pulls people who work with each other, like each other, together. They build a bond. That was his original work. Actually, I did hear Robert Putnam give a lecture in Birmingham once, and he did a list of 10 things that are likely to lead to your early death, and I ticked off 7 of them. One of them was commuting more than 20 minutes to work, because I lived in Islington and worked in Birmingham. Anyway, but that's no joke. The epidemiological evidence illustrates it. We are social animals, but so much of our modern life doesn't take account of that. But then he moved on to not what we as individuals need, but what we as individuals who are part of a collective need. And he drew attention to 2 sorts of social capital. The one I've just been talking about, where you bond with others who are quite like you and you're mates with, potentially mates with. And then the social capital that bridges across those groups that are not like each other. And that's where we came up with the idea of calling this talk The Two Islingtons. Because we think Islington is a great place to be a middle-class professional or a retired middle-class professional. I mean, preferably when your children no longer costing you large amounts of money and you can afford to live here. And we feel, you're an institution that is part of that. It's part of what makes it good to live in Islington, that there are institutions like this, and which we also, affiliate to. But Islington has another set of people. They're the families of its poor children, who have some bonding social capital. I think we saw that with the Arsenal parade. Islington people feel a connection with each other and come out. Whether that was bonding or bridging, I'm not quite sure, because there'll be plenty of middle-class professionals out waving at the guys as well. But what we want to suggest to you is that unless we have this bridging social capital between the 2 worlds of Islington, we're letting those children down. They need people like us. They need our know-how, our skills, our money, our other resources, our time. They need lots of things in order to survive and prosper in the modern world. And many of them are not getting it. They get it a bit from us, but we're middle-class professionals. One of my heroes of this story is the young head teacher in her first year, first term as a head, who inherited pretty much a sink school. No, you shouldn't use that term, but very, very poor outcomes in SATs and things like that. And she discovered, actually picking up the trauma point, that many of her parents themselves needed a trauma-informed approach. They protected their children from what they saw as the awful experience of school by keeping them off, not taking them, and protected themselves by not engaging with this, and she's beginning to turn that round. She understands that improving her school and the lives of her children is a two-generational process. And they now have, I think they have something called Saturday Pizza, where the wonderful school cook comes in and does pizza for people who do activities together on a Saturday morning. So there are lots and lots of people around trying to make a difference. But we could do so much more if you joined us in this, or some of you joined in this. So I come to our final slide, which is really saying, good, you've come to give me a meaningful look about finishing in 5 minutes. I'm going to. I'm going to do the final slide, is that okay? Yes. Yes, Antonio promised us a meaningful look if we, by the time we reach 40 minutes, here she is. So how can you help if you want to do so? Well, I'm not going to do the full Bob Geldof imitation, but if you'd like to give us some of your money, we'd be glad to take it off your hands, because we could do so much more if we had more resources. It takes us at the moment, a full year to scrape up the 60,000 and do all the laborious grant form filling and so on. And we've got to try and break through to a better form of fundraising. So we'd certainly take money off you, but we'd particularly like help in kind. If any of you have fundraising experience, we desperately need to augment our own fundraising subcommittee, which is basically James, Annie and me at the moment. We'd welcome you to join us. If you'd like to be involved more directly with the children, we run a walking bus from the farthest school from we're running at Rotherfield at one end of the patch, and the farthest school is Moorfield, which is the other side of which is the other side of City Road. And so we run a walking bus from there at the beginning and the end of the day, which needs 2 people to accompany them. We are a bit tight on that, so we'd be very glad to have anyone who wanted to do that. Come and help us in the kitchen. Come and sit and hear children read, or do other things with children. Accompany us to the seaside, and see what fun that is. That's all we have to say by way of telling our story, giving some greater depth and explanation about some of it, and just suggestions about what you might want to do. What we'd also like, though, is your ideas, and some of that might come out now, but some could come out later. So we'd be very glad to talk to you.
So much, Sue and James. The people who haven't come today because of the heat have missed a really wonderful talk. So we have 15 minutes for any questions. Okay, Jane, there. Anyone else after her? Okay, Keith. Okay, Jane.
Hi. That was so fascinating. So
Can you stand up, Jane, so we can hear you?
So glad I made the effort to come here. Really, really interesting to know about where we're living. Just a couple of questions, really, points. I'm wondering if the students get an opportunity to do forest school work at all, environmental education things, which I know is really, really helpful for young people. Have they worked with horses? Those are great for young people as well. And I think it's possible.
I can't hear you, Jane. For some reason, we can't hear you very well.
Do your children work with forest schools people at all? Environmental education? In a fun setting. Have you worked with horses? Also good. And I'd be very interested to know what your trauma approach actually means in terms of what you do. Hearing how important it is, but that wasn't really very clear how that manifests itself in your behaviour and your working with the children.
The forest school.
I heard the forest school.
Thank you.
I didn't hear the latter part, but perhaps roughly I can respond to that. We don't actually, although perhaps we should. We pick up new ideas all the time. My own daughter used to be in forest school camps way back. You may be talking about something other than FSC. because I know that some primary schools certainly do have forest school day, sometimes my grandchildren do. So you may be referring to that, and I'd be very glad to hear more about that idea. I'm really sorry, but I don't know why. Maybe it's because I've got this headset on. I didn't catch the later things, but...
Jane's second suggestion was about horses, that he considered doing something that way.
Oh, wonderful idea. Do you know, I mean, if you know how we might set that up, that would be just great. So, talk to us about it.
Thank you for the suggestion about horses. Keith, would you like to say something?
Yes, just to say, is there a similar organisation covering Islington North, or have you thought of expanding your work into the north?
Not as far as we know. There are now lots of play schemes, which come out of, generated really out of the government funding through holiday activities and food programmes. I think there's about 24 across the whole of Islington. And most of them, are for keeping kids safe, making sure they've got food, and, providing some sort of sport or other play support. So there's nothing quite like us. I think that one of the reasons that our group can be generated in South Islington, because we've got so many, you're like us in the room, we've got so many people with higher level skills and confidence that are required to go and ask people for money and do all the, have all the safeguard, all those many different correct but bureaucratic processes you have to leap through. So it's not so easy if you don't have the educational background behind you to do it. And I guess maybe I'm just my daughter lives in Islington North, so I know there are loads and loads of highly educated people who live there, but they're perhaps at an earlier stage than some of us in our life and are busier living their everyday life rather than with time in their hands as we have, most of us have.
Okay, question on this side, Alison. The microphone's coming to you. Hold on.
Right, thank you. Fred Coatford. Thank you for a very inspiring talk. Raises a number of questions in my head. Sorry, can you hear me? Is that better?
Even better.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for a very inspiring talk. About 5 or 6 years ago, in relation to the North, I'm not sure if this is in the North or it might be technically still in the South, the chair of our ward, Jackie Clark, Labour Party ward, St Mary's ward, and as it was, and now St Mary's and St James, and Mission in Dongo invited us to go and see something called the Light Project, which runs off Caledonian Road. Began life as a homework club, but has expanded beyond that for children who can't really study at home, I think, have a place to go where there will be staff and food and assistance in the evenings. I don't know if I have any connection with them, that's just a comment I made. My question is really this, perhaps a bit pretentious question. When I was very young and idealistic, I raised from your type of Two Islingtons. I read a book by Disraeli called Civil or Two Nations, and he proposed at that time that there was a massive divide that needed to be bridged between the wealthy landowners and the working class, as it were, if I may put it like that. Now it seems to me that we've got that it hasn't ever fully been, it's changed, but now we've also got multicultural, multi-faith societies.
Yeah.
Does that affect the work that you do in the bonding and so on? Thank you.
I can hear most of it, yes. I like the Disraelian idea. I think it's probably not going to happen, is it? But, just to pick up really the last element, because it triggers something I perhaps should have said. We don't actually try and match sexes, races, any other feature of our children, but every year it turns out that they are a microcosm of the children of Islington, and we're able to report, our monitoring reports to our grant givers show that we are in fact open to all children of the right age and living in the right area. And we never see any interracial problems. Last year, the Asylum Hotel down off City Road was being picketed as we were collecting children from Morland School and walking up. And actually, most of the time they weren't coinciding, but there was a lot of racial tension in the air. And actually, it's just wonderful to see these 9 to 11-year-olds playing with each other, working with each other in a way that's completely unconscious of those divides. And they're different faiths sometimes as well. We reflect that in the food that we provide, by the way.
Okay, could we have a question here from this lady? Can you stand up?
Yes. I'm Dr. Barbara Nair. I'm a retired psychiatrist. I'm really inspired by the work you do. It's wonderful. But I can't help thinking that these children go back to the same homes, you know, and that is such an important part of their lives. I do remember that as a psychiatrist, I used to work with the carers, with the families. Is there any help that is available for the mothers of these children so that they could understand these children better and what it is that we in a Western society expect of these children?
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Do you want to go?
I don't have a good answer myself.
I don't know why I'm not hearing properly, but I was picking up about one word in every 4. And I think there was something there about the family background and working with the families.
Helping the mothers.
And helping the mothers, yeah. I mean, we are very, very aware that we need to engage with parents, and well, we need to demonstrate to them that it's safe to let their children come to us. So we do presentations in schools, we do playground sessions at the beginning and end of schools to reassure. And now we've been doing it for nearly 8 years. There's a lot of word of mouth stuff about us in our little area, so that there are links there. We do informally lots of connecting with agencies. One of our trustees is a food bank organiser and is able to, kind of cover that side of things. So there's lots of practical stuff that we could do. We'd like to be able to do more because we think, in line with what the head I referred to as doing, we think improvements are at least two generational process. We welcome parents in. We have a lovely party at the end where every child's allowed, to bring in a parent and any siblings who are available, or more than one parent, and everybody has a nice time together eating nice food and with an award ceremony where they all get prizes. So we make it as open and as welcoming as we can. But we could do more if we had more resources. One of the things that I should say is that we would really, if we could, we'd really like to have some sort of graduate scheme whereby we kept in touch, perhaps through mentoring or an occasional drop-in centre. The year 6s who leave us and go into secondary, and if we could find a way of being a part of their lives for a while to help them through those turbulent years and bring resources to them, we'd really like to do that. But that's more than we can manage at the moment on our current resources. But it's, there are lots of thoughts like that about what more we could do.
Thank you. James, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did want to just add a little bit on that point from my experience as a parent, because what I've seen is that for preschoolers, there is a reasonable amount of support available for parents as well as for their children. My son used to go to an Islington Council-funded thing called Bright Start for 0 to 5s, and the parents were encouraged to come along to that, and it was as much for teaching the parents how to interact with their children as it was for dealing with the children, working with the children. And in fact, I remember that they had a sign on the front, they still do, of the room that says, this is not for nannies to bring children, this is for parents to bring children. If you're a nanny or a childminder, if you're being paid to look after this child, you're not who we're trying to serve, because we're trying to serve parents who are caregivers day to day and help them to care for their children. So in the 0 to 5 level, I think that really exists. What I don't know, and I'd love to know, is whether the same thing exists as children get older, because I don't see it. I see the parents that I know at my son's school, I don't see the support being available for them in the same way that it was when my son was under 5. I don't know that that's there in the same way, and often when I chat to parents at the school gate, I don't know where to signpost them, because I don't know what support there is for them once their children are at school and on from school. I'd love to know if anybody knows better than that, because I know parents who would like to have that opportunity.
Thank you. Just one more question and then we will draw to a close. Yes, Paula.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting and inspiring talk, and thank you very much for that. But one of the things that remains really unclear to me, you talk about raising money, but I've got no idea how for example, if people sitting around in this august hall wanted to contribute, how they would go about it. You know, is there any sort of hook? So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think, it would be really interesting to know if you suddenly got if you got that organised and you suddenly got a lot of people contributing, you had more money, what would be the first thing that you'd do with it?
What a brilliant question, Paul. Anyone would think it had been planted. Right. Well, it's easy to donate. There were some flyers around. Now, thanks to James, we've got a website and a donate button on it, so you could do that. Or at the back of our annual report, you'll find how to donate. So there's no shortage of information on that. I think if Paula, if you were to give me £50,000, just a suggestion, I think I'd give the first 10 of that to our schools, because it seems so mean to ask them to do so much work for £3,500. That's lots and lots of tutor hours. A bit more, perhaps if we could give them 5,000 each, that would help to augment that. I'd then really like to spend some money perhaps on educational evaluative research, so we actually know more about the impact that we're having, so that we can have another reset if we need to, that will adapt the direction that we're taking. It's very easy to get involved in the day-to-day. I know who's cooking the baked potatoes today, all that stuff, and all that stuff is important, but we have to remember we are doing this to achieve a purpose, and is the evidence showing that we are achieving our purpose? So I'd like to, I don't know whether I've used up the 50 by now, but I could go on with more. So, cheque or bank transfer would be fine.
Thank you, Sue. Well, I have to say, this has been one of the most interesting talks I have heard in our monthly meetings. And I think Islington iu3a would like to know a lot more about SPAG and your website and possibilities of fundraising. And I would like very much to have access to the very good slides, which are very small and couldn't be seen properly. And maybe we can have copies.
Yeah, I can show you.
Yeah, so that we can distribute them. And it's very sobering to hear that what I consider as a North Islington resident, that South Islington is this privileged place to show what massive difference there is between the poor and the rich. And such an interesting question as to whether we could set this up in North Islington. Brilliant talk from both of you. Thank you so much.